FPL Game Week 1 final decisions. It is the day, it is Friday, FPL is back today. Today what we're going to do in this video is we'll go through some of the highly spoken about questions that people are still looking to decide going into the Game Week 1 deadline. You have sent me these in. We'll talk about my team, we'll talk about a few things I'm looking at as well in today's final decisions. What is up everyone, FPL Harry here. Before we dive in, 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here, and happy FPL launch day. The Premier League is back this evening, of course, with Manchester United against Fulham. Today we're going to have a look at those final decisions. Now, those of you who might be new to the channel, we do this video every single week. Normally what we do is we have a look at injury updates, we have a look at press conference quotes, we answer a few questions, captaincy, and we have a look at my final team going into the deadline. But today we don't have so much of that press conference news. We don't have major injury updates because we're pretty certain of things we've got, and a lot of the press conferences take place today on Friday. We'll of course go through all of that on the deadline stream this evening, but what we're going to do in today's video is I put a post out, I asked for lots of questions, and I took the ones that are being asked the most that you are still looking to decide on. We'll talk about expensive players, we'll talk about Salah versus Haaland, we'll talk about Palmer, why people aren't picking him, we'll talk about those mid-priced options, we'll talk about whether Eze is going to go to Manchester City. We're going to cover everything that you have spammed in the comments, both on my team selection video if you haven't watched that already, and over on Twitter and in the YouTube community section as well. But before we do that, this video is being sponsored by Fantasy Football Scout. You've seen it all out throughout pre-season. It's where I get a lot of the data that I use in these videos and to make my decisions as well. I've done player comparisons, I've read articles, I've had the look at the fixture ticket, and now of course the app is out. I've shown it to you before, and again, it is such a good tool for the start of the season. Check it out. They still have 40% off all the way up until the Game Week 1 deadline as well. But we're going to dive in. The first thing is Salah versus Haaland or both. To be honest, we're at the point now where I think most of you watching will have made a decision on whether you're going Salah, whether you're going Haaland, whether you're going both of them, or whether you're going neither. To be honest, my opinion still stands that I think you need to pick one of them. I think your squad suffers too much to have both when you're only going to be able to captain one of them most weeks. And given that they're both not necessarily the best captain in Game Week 1, although Salah probably is, but after that, you would be looking at Haaland and other players. I'm not certain you need to have both of them in your team going into the start of the season. So definitely, I think having neither is the weakest because of captaincy. Captaincy without them in Game Week 1 looks fine, but after that is definitely weaker. Haaland versus Salah, I'm on Haaland only. You can go Salah only, you can go both, but I think picking one is the best way, and that's what we saw in the 5 drafts video that I did, that you need to be picking one, and the predicted points do reflect that. Next up is Eze. There's been so much speculation over the past couple of days about what we should do with Eze. Is he likely to move to Manchester City? So, of course, with Oscar Bob getting injured, it has sparked up a few people to wonder if Manchester City will come in and pay the release clause for Eze going into the deadline or going into the end of the transfer window over the next few weeks. Of course, it doesn't have to be done going into Game Week 1 of FPL because the transfer window runs all the way until the end of August. With Oscar Bob being out, they could put Foden and Bernardo Silva out onto that right wing and sign Eze as a central player. They could, in theory, go into the season with no replacement and play Savinho out there, play Doku and Grealish on the left, keep Foden, Bernardo Silva and De Bruyne playing centrally with one of them occasionally filling in on that right wing like Bernardo Silva has before. The actual sort of prediction at the moment is that Eze is just about likely to stay at Crystal Palace. I do think he's still worth a pick at the moment. At time of recording and going into the deadline, if something does change and we see a bit more news, then I'll of course update you. But at the moment, I still have Eze in my team, and I do still think he'll be a Crystal Palace player over the first few weeks. Having a quick look at the captaincy ranking as well for Game Week 1. If you are going with Mo Salah, I do just about think he's the best captain for Game Week 1. It's very close between Salah and then Isak is my number 2. If you are going without Isak, I do think that you should rethink that. He's probably the best option outside of Salah. For those no Salah drafts, Isak should be in your draft because he is the best captain option in Game Week 1. Saka is closely in third with Wolves at home. You could also look at Havertz or Odegaard in that midfield option if you did decide to go without Saka. I like Son in at number 4 going away to Leicester, and then it is Erling Haaland. Do still expect City to score some goals against Chelsea like they seem to always do. 4 goals last time they played at Stamford Bridge as well, and Erling Haaland always seems to be involved. Now diving into a few of the questions that you're asking. First of all is, why are loads of people, including myself, going with Nkunku and not picking Cole Palmer for the start of the season? To be honest, I think Nkunku and Palmer do need to sit separately in your mind. I'm not picking Nkunku over Palmer because there's a £4 million bracket difference. I'm picking Palmer versus Saka. I'm picking Palmer versus Son. I'm picking Nkunku versus Leon Bailey. I'm picking Nkunku versus Morgan Gibbs-White. They sit very separately. If I had the money, if they were the same price, I would pick Palmer every single week, but they're not. Nkunku for me is the best 6.5 million option. I do think he is a really nice value pick. He has a great goal scoring record. Yes, he got injured, but generally he's not an injury prone player. He's just been unlucky in the season that he had at Chelsea. From game week 2 onwards, the fixtures do look really nice. So at 6.5, I think Nkunku is really nice. It's when you start to compare the likes of Saka to Palmer, when you've already got Nkunku in your team, a lot of people don't want that double up on Chelsea and want to diversify their picks, because as a Chelsea fan, as much as I might hate to say it, there is uncertainty with Chelsea going into the start of the season. How are we going to line up? Who's going to play where? Where are these new signings going to fill in? And how long will it take us to gel? Risking a 6.5 million asset in that team is much less stressful than missing a 10.5, probably the second most expensive player in your lineup in that Chelsea team. So Palmer just feels like a bit more of a risk, and he's only played 45 minutes in pre-season, and we don't actually know what role a lot of these Chelsea players, including Palmer, is going to play in the Chelsea team. Yes, he'll still be on penalties. Yes, he'll still be a good pick, but we don't know exactly where and which of the number 8s he's going to play, how central he's going to be, and things like that. So just based off uncertainty is why I think Palmer is not massively popular. Next up, we have Spurs. Solanke, of course, has signed, and then you're looking at Son as well. I don't think any of the other attackers in Kulusevski or Brennan Johnson or Maddison are massively worth picking. The only other player you can consider, of course, is Pedro Porro in defence at 5.5. I don't love him, but I don't mind him as well. There is a small chance I own him for game week 1. I don't think it will happen, though. I don't mind Pedro Porro. They just concede too many goals, so you are relying on a lot of attacking returns for him to get enough points to compete with some of the others. And he definitely has the ability to do that. But we're talking about the attackers, and it's Solanke versus Son. I do think Son will be the one that keeps penalties. I do think he will be their penalty taker for the start of the season, but I still think Solanke is a better pick. He scored 19 goals last season, and only one of them was a penalty. So 18 open play goals for Bournemouth, and I can only see him doing well at Spurs. You save 2.5 million over a Son. Now, Son, I don't think will be quite as good an asset because he won't get those positions central. Solanke is very much a central number 9. He'll be on that penalty spot. He likes to be there. He likes to be in finishing positions. He'll link up well with Son. He'll link up well with Kulusevski, with Brennan Johnson, with Maddison. But I do think he'll want to be that focal point of that attack. So if I'm picking one of these, I'm absolutely going with Solanke for the start of the season. And looking at the quotes from Ange, it does look like he's going to be set to start the season. And then we're moving on to Liverpool. So looking at their attack, Jota, Diaz, Salah, of course, you've got Darwin, and you've got Gakpo as well. Salah, what you pay for is the minutes. If you are going Salah, you're paying for the minutes, you're paying for the starts, you're paying for the penalties as well. And that is absolutely worthwhile if you think that Salah is going to get penalties and you think he'll be a good goal threat, which of course he always has at Liverpool. But what we're relying on, if those of us going Jota, probably over Diaz, because Diaz has been linked with Barcelona and is also a slight minutes risk with, Nunez and Gakpo, and even Jota being able to play a little bit out on that left-hand side. You're getting that explosive potential that you potentially get with Jota. He's likely to start game week 1 against Ipswich playing up front. And if he does well, he should start game week 2. And if he plays well, he'll keep his place. He is a great goal scorer. He is the big punt for me in my game week 1 team, though. I'm taking the gamble that he does keep his place. If he does, he's one of the best players in the league for goal output per 90 minutes he's on the pitch. He has the ability to be an incredible asset at 7.5. Luis Diaz has never massively done it. Yes, at the weekend in their last friendly, he scored twice. Historically, though, we've not really wanted Luis Diaz as a pick, but we have wanted a fit Diego Jota playing number 9 as a pick, and that's part of the reason that he is in my Game Week 1 team. Next up, we're going to be focusing on Brighton. Just before we do that, I had a couple of people asking about Zinchenko of Arsenal. I do think he's likely to start Game Week 1, but I think it will be very soon before he loses his place, either to Calafiori most likely or potentially to Timber as well. But I do think it'll be Calafiori coming in at left back in that Arsenal team. I think Game Week 1, Zinchenko might start, but I think by Game Week 3, if not Game Week 4 at the very latest after the international break, it will be Calafiori starting. So unless you're guaranteeing an early wildcard, I would stay away from Zinchenko. Now we're going to look at Brighton. First of all, we're going to start up front and we're going to talk about Joao Pedro. Joao Pedro is likely to start and he's on penalties, but they have so many forwards. They've just signed Ruta from Leeds. They're looking at a few other options in that attacking line. Of course, they've got Welbeck, they've got Ferguson when he's fit, they've got Mitoma, they've got March, they've got Minte, they've got Adingra. They have so many attackers. So even if Joao Pedro does start, he's not guaranteed to play more than 60, 70 minutes. Normally we felt we had a 90-minute man on penalties at 5.5 and that was worthwhile. The opening fixtures are mixed. I don't hate him as an option, but I'm going a little bit colder on him just based off the other assets that we've got. He has also had a pretty mixed injury record. He did pick up a knock, of course, in pre-season. Hasn't had a whole host of pre-season. If you only have 5.5 million, he's still my pick over someone like an Armstrong. But if you have 0.5 spare, I would be going with someone like a Muniz of Fulham or a Chris Wood for the start of the season if that 0.5 million doesn't do anything else for your team. And then we're looking in defence, and Barco is getting a lot of questions. For those of you who have missed it, Brighton are linked with another fullback from Fenerbahce who can actually play almost every position on the pitch. I believe he's been signed to play right back for Brighton, so that doesn't massively concern me. However, what concerns me is Pervis Estupiñán has been said that he started training outside already, and that is, of course, a concern. It's not certain that Estupiñán will be first choice. It's not certain that it will come in over Barco. It's probably a 60% chance it will be Estupiñán and a 40% chance that it will be Barco. But of course, with Estupiñán being back, it is a risk. And the chances are that he'll be back by game week 4, which is when they play Ipswich after the international break, and that we really want him. Now, if he gets minutes, he's by far the best 4.0 option. Game week 1 against Everton, he should be absolutely fine to play that as well. So if you need a 4.0 for game week 1, still go Barco. I still have Barco for my team at the moment as my 5th defender. I just fancy taking a gamble because I don't like the other 4.0s at the start of the season. I will look out for the Brighton press conference on Friday to see what they say about Barco, what they say about Estupiñán, but he's definitely become less appealing, but I don't think he's a complete avoid because there is a chance he keeps his place. 3 final questions that you wanted me to answer. First of all, is that Saka, Son, Palmer? I do like Son, but as I spoke about with Son, I do like Solanke as an alternative. I do like Palmer, but I like Nkunku as a cheaper alternative. And in game week 1, we have the least amount of budget we'll have throughout the whole season. So you are having to make these sacrifices elsewhere in your team. That's why I've ended up with Saka. I also expect Arsenal and Saka to go very close to winning the league again. He's very focal to what they do, and he's on penalties as well. And as I said, I think they'll win the league. I think it will be very, very close. I think they have a good chance. I actually might put them as my prediction to finish first because of the injuries and outgoings that Manchester City have at the moment. If they sign replacements, then maybe we'll see. But at the moment, I think I might just edge it to Arsenal. And I want their main man going into the season with Saka. Next up is that mid-price striker option. So Muniz, Wood and Joao Pedro. As I said on Joao Pedro is I prefer Muniz and Wood over him. Now, part of that might depend on whether you go with a Hudson-Odoi, a Smith Rowe in your midfield. Because if you go Smith Rowe, I probably would go Chris Wood. Now, we are talking a little bit about coverage there, which I don't love to talk about. But, you know, you're doubling up on Fulham. And if Fulham don't perform, which they can do some weeks, then you do have 2 assets from their team. They both have great opening fixtures. If it is a complete head-to-head shootout, I still just about put Wood first, Muniz second, and then Joao Pedro third. That is my current ranking at the moment. Then we're looking at the 5.5 million options. Of course, Oscar Bob is injured, so you can't go buying him. Amad Diallo at Manchester United only got 59 minutes in the Community Shield. Garnacho is back. I don't think you want to be picking him either. Rodgers feels like the safest one, and he's actually found his way back into my draft as well. He feels like the safest. He does feel like he'll get minutes at Aston Villa, and he has a good goal-scoring record when he's got minutes as well. One is a bit of a differential just to consider is Adama Traore at Fulham. He's been an FPL asset at times in the past. He's likely to be their starting right winger. If you've got a Muniz or a Smith Rowe, you probably don't want him. But if you haven't got either of those, he's just worth a bit of an outside shout because he should get some decent minutes and we know how good their fixtures are. And then ranking a few price points. If you've watched any of my videos over pre-season, you'll know that I absolutely hate pretty much every single goalkeeper in the game. And I don't think any of them are worth picking for their price. No one has a nice enough run of fixtures. No one combines that with being nailed and at a cheap enough price for me. But here is my ranking for them anyway. I do like David Raya. I'm not certain he's worth the 5.5 over the first 5 weeks. But over the first 20 weeks and the season, I'm almost certain they will keep the most clean sheets. They kept 18 last season and I think will be the highest scoring goalkeeper. If you have 5.5, it's worth spending on Raya. But if you don't, then Henderson at Crystal Palace is the next best option. And there's not that much to pick between them. You can also get Matthews at Crystal Palace, who's 4 million and likely to be the backup now that Johnson is likely to go. So you have that added benefit. Outside of that, I actually quite like the 5 million options. Martinez at Aston Villa is a decent option. Leno at Fulham, if you're not going Robinson, is fine. Pickford, also a fine option. If you're going 5.5, it's Raya. If you're going 4.5, it's Henderson. If you have the luxury to go 5, they just feel a little bit more reliable, but don't quite have this, clean sheet potential that David Raya does have. Then having a look at my favourite 4.5 million defenders, Anthony Robinson is the one in my team, and I'm putting him number 1. Of course, game week 1's not ideal. He goes away to Manchester United, but after that, the fixtures look really nice. They are strengthening defensively. They have looked solid in pre-season, and he is good going forward. Next up, I've just put Ola Aina at Nottingham Forest just because of him as a long-term pick. The fixtures look great. They had great underlying data in terms of defensive ability. They didn't get that many clean sheets though, but I still like him. Quansah in at number 3, and he is starting to creep into my thinking as we get closer to the deadline. 4.5 for a starting Liverpool defender, I really like. It would mean doubling up with Trent in a lot of our teams though. The only other thing to bear in mind with Quansah is it does mean that you have triple Liverpool. If you're going with a Salah or a Jota, you're going with a Trent, and you're going with a Quansah. Let's say that Luis Diaz, let's say that Darwin or Jota or Salah that you don't own starts really well, and you can't buy them because you've got a 4.5 defender. That's why he's not higher up this list for me. It's just because it might take up a third Liverpool spot. Lewis Hall I really like for game week 1. Probably my favourite for game week 1. After that, if Mark Gay does sign, what does that do to Dan Burn? A slight uncertainty of minutes, and the fixtures are not quite as good. There's a lot of away games in there for Newcastle, but if you're planning an early wildcard game week 4 or so, he's definitely the best one, but as a longer term pick, he does drop off slightly, but I do fancy him as a differential. And then we're going with Mykolenko in at number 5. He's definitely dropped down my estimations as pre-season has gone on, but they're still a solid defence. They're still going to have Branthwaite back at some point, unlikely in game week 1. They do have Pickford, and they are solid, and Dice does like to keep clean sheets, and he rotates pretty well with Robinson, who is my number 1 pick. Then having a look at the 5.5 million mid. So I've spoken a lot about Smith Rowe, and I do really like him. He is my number 1 pick. The fixtures from game week 2 look great, and if you have to start him in game week 1, I wouldn't worry too much about that. Hudson-Odoi is in at second. Again, he's above the others because he does feel the most reliable for starts, plus having sort of history of points and a great run of opening fixtures. Minte of Brighton is actually coming in number 3rd. He would be higher up if the Brighton opening fixtures were slightly better. And of course, they have so many wingers. Just like I mentioned with Joao Pedro, they have the likes of Matoma, March, Adingra. Joao Pedro can play out there as well. And then, of course, Minte, who has been great. He's in at number 3, but when the fixtures turn, he will be very popular. I put Murphy of Newcastle in at number 4. He is a very short-term punt. Southampton at home on the opening day. They've also got Spurs at home in their opening 3. The issue is Newcastle are likely to sign a right winger and compete with Murphy before the end of the transfer window. So he's a great pick. I think he'll be the highest scoring 5.5 million midfielder over the first 3 weeks, but then he'll be a transfer out once game week 4, etc. does roll around. And number 5 is a bit of a differential. I've put in Ben Brereton Diaz of Southampton. He's likely to be playing either on the wing or as part of a front 2. He has history of getting points at Sheffield United when they were still awful as well. Small chances on penalties, especially if Armstrong is not on the pitch. And from game week 2 onwards, they do have a really nice run of fixtures as well. So just running you through my team and how we're looking. Of course, we had the big team selection video yesterday and virtually nothing has changed. The only slight change is I know some of you put me off going with double Crystal Palace defence, and I did downgrade Muniz to Aina, who also rotates really well in my defence. And the reason I did that is I wanted 0.5 to upgrade Sangare to Rodgers. And the reason for that is the slight uncertainty of Eze. If Eze does decide that he's going to go to Manchester City before game week 2 or game week 3, I don't want to be left playing a defender with a bad fixture or playing a 4.5 million midfielder, or of course forced into a transfer to sell Eze. So at least in this situation, if one of my front 7 has an issue, I do have a reliable option who I think will get 60-70 minutes most weeks for Aston Villa. Probably my favourite 5.0 million option in midfield in Rodgers sat on the bench. So it looks pretty much the same. I'm getting pretty settled now. Of course, we'll have a look on the deadline stream if anything's likely to change. We've got any more Eze news that we don't have at the moment, but this is where we're at. Just to show you what it would look like if we got news that Eze is very likely to leave, which I don't think is going to happen, I would make 3 changes. I would downgrade Eze to Smith Rowe and get me that Fulham attacker, which I do really want. And I would use that money, that 1.5 that I free up, I'd go back to Muniz of Crystal Palace. So I would have a Crystal Palace sort of defender attacker hybrid in Muniz to hopefully cover not having Eze there anymore, and then Henderson in goal. And the other 1 million I'd go for David Raya in goal. So that would be what I do if I hear that Eze, and I have enough doubt in my mind about Eze staying at Crystal Palace. But at the moment, I think he will stay. So we're going with the Eze, Aina, Henderson combo at the moment. And we're feeling pretty settled. Things are not changing very much. Anything in the press conference that might happen on Friday, yes, but of course we'll have a look at it all on my deadline stream on Friday. The only other thing, of course, is do I want to start Rodgers over Nkunku? Slightly better fixture for Rodgers, but I am at the moment back in the home fixture of Nkunku, with Rodgers just being my first reliable sub option for most of the weeks. The only other thing actually just to mention is I have gone back to Valdemarston on the bench. I did have the Wolves backup. He is being linked with Arsenal, and if that transfer was to happen, I don't want to use up an Arsenal spot on a 4.0 goalkeeper. So that's why Bentley has left. Valdemarston has come in, but generally it's all down to Eze now and whether I think I want him for game week 1. So that is all for the final decisions video. That is all for the pre-recorded videos going into game week 1. Before I talk about the deadline stream, another opportunity to say a massive thank you. Thank you all so much for your support during pre-season. All the watches on the videos has been incredible. We've hit over 2 million views during pre-season. To everyone who's new around here, thank you for tuning in and thank you for subscribing. If you haven't already, make sure you go and subscribe now. If you've been here for a while again, thank you all for your support over the years. We're going to be back into the usual weekly content from Sunday evening where we'll have transfer plans, we'll have transfer targets, players to buy for you, we'll have my team selection, and then we'll have the final decision video and then the deadline stream every single week as well. So that's 5 pieces of content on my channel every single week for you. Make sure you subscribe if you aren't already. There will be a 2.5 hour deadline stream from 4 o'clock this evening on Friday. The stream is already scheduled, so click the link above, click on the stream, find it, click notify for a reminder when that goes live. We spend it tinkering my team, but particularly answering your questions all throughout the stream as well. So if you haven't tuned in before, I hope to see you there. If you have tuned in before, I look forward to being back. They are definitely the highlight of my week. Thank you all so much for watching all of the preseason content and this video as well. 1,000 likes is the aim. Subscribe if you are new around here, and I'll be back again very soon.